This is CR Change Request, your structural brief for Wednesday, April 29th, 2026. Today's read covers 9 signals across financial rails, media infrastructure, public procurement, energy coordination, AI labor economics, healthcare authority, housing scarcity, and monetary discipline. The through line this cycle is coordination under stress. Systems that once looked stable are either absorbing disruption, defending authority, or exposing the limits of their own operating model. The surface stories are different. The structural question is the same. Who controls the rails when pressure enters the system? Visa beat earnings this week. Payments volume up 9%, shares up more than 6% on the news. The coverage is treating it as a consumer spending story, and on the surface, that read holds. Cards are working, cross-border travel is back, digital rails are healthy. But the number that actually matters is buried further down the release. Visa's stablecoin settlement run rate hit $7 billion annually, up more than 50% from the prior quarter. The bridge partnership expanded stablecoin-linked cards across more than 100 countries. That is not a pilot. That is not a study. That is absorption already running at scale through a regulated network. Here is the piece most people miss. For years, the crypto argument was that legacy finance was too slow, too intermediated, too captured by clearing systems built in the 1970s. The response from legacy finance was not to fight that argument. It was to absorb the useful part and leave the decentralization premise behind. So if you are watching this space, watch Visa, MasterCard, and bridge volume disclosures. Watch stablecoin penetration into Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia, where this demand is structural, not speculative. The future of money may not bypass Visa, it may move through it. And that absorption story has a companion signal sitting right beside it in the settlement layer. The SEC is exploring a move towards same-day or near real-time trade settlement following last year's transition to T+1. The framing is modernization, faster settlement, less risk, more liquidity, reasonable on its face. But sit with it for a moment. The argument crypto made for years was that traditional finance could not move value at the speed of the internet. Now, traditional finance is quietly proving it can. The infrastructure is changing, but the authority is not. Where Visa shows absorption already operational, T+0 is earlier in the maturity curve, still being studied, but pointed in the same direction. Both signals are telling you the same thing. The system does not always beat disruption by blocking it. Sometimes it beats disruption by incorporating exactly the part consumers wanted the most. The next fight will not be about speed. It will be about custody, transparency, access, and who controls the ledger. Traditional finance is not rejecting crypto's premise. It is domesticating it. That question of who controls the rails moves into media this week with a different kind of pressure. The FCC ordered early license reviews for 8 Disney-owned ABC stations, pulling reviews originally scheduled for 2028 forward by years. Most of the coverage is treating it as another chapter in the conflict between the administration and major media companies. That framing is not wrong, but it is incomplete. What is actually happening is a shift in where regulatory pressure lands. Broadcast licenses are access rights to public airwaves. They are operational permission. When license review becomes a pressure point, the conflict moves out of the content layer and into the distribution layer. That is a structurally different fight. If you have studied institutional power, you have seen this before. Institutions rarely control media by responding to every story. They control proximity, licensing, advertising access, platform eligibility, merger review. legal exposure. The question now is whether this expands beyond Disney-owned stations into broader broadcaster compliance scrutiny, and how media companies adjust legal posture and political risk management when distribution rights are part of the conflict. The power move is not correcting the coverage, it is threatening the channel. From media infrastructure to physical infrastructure, and the same question shows up in a different form. Maryland is parting ways with Kiewit Infrastructure on Phase 2 of the Francis Scott Key Bridge rebuild after a cost disagreement. The state estimate remains between $4.3 and $5.2 billion, and procurement is restarting. The headline reads as a contractor dispute. The structural read is what happens when emergency infrastructure recovery meets public procurement reality. The collapse created national urgency. The rebuild is now meeting a harder system layer: cost control, contractor selection, labor capacity, federal oversight, change order risk, schedule credibility. And the Baltimore region carries the consequence directly. Port throughput, regional trucking corridors, automotive import flow, construction labor availability, BWI tourism. All of it depends on rebuild timing. A procurement reset is not a delay on paper, it is a delay on the regional economy. If you have been in these rooms, you know how this goes. Major infrastructure projects rarely strain at the announcement stage. They strain when public urgency enters private pricing. Watch the May Industry Forum, the federal cost discipline coming through DOT and FHWA, the Maryland Transportation Authority bond posture, and whether the 2030 opening target survives reprocurement. Infrastructure is announced in crisis, but governed in procurement. While that procurement drama plays out in Baltimore, a different kind of coordination stress is breaking open in global energy. The UAE announced it will leave OPEC and OPEC Plus effective May 1st, removing one of the alliance's largest producers. Brent is trading more than 50% above its pre-war price. The story is being framed as oil market news inside the Iran war cycle, and that framing captures part of it. But the deeper signal is institutional. OPEC's power has never been only about production volume. It has been about coordinated restraint. When a major producer exits during wartime supply disruption, the market is watching alliance discipline weaken in real time. Energy alliances hold when coordination protects shared leverage. They weaken when members decide flexibility is more valuable than collective restraint. And the consequences travel: airline fuel costs, inflation pressure, central bank posture, consumer spending. For tourism and hospitality in particular, fuel volatility flows directly into airfare, destination affordability, and event travel. The war is the headline. Energy coordination is the system signal. That energy pressure feeds directly into the next signal because the AI cost story and the labor story are connected to the same rising infrastructure costs. Gartner just challenged the dominant story about AI in customer service. Their projection is that by 2030, Gen AI cost per resolution will exceed $3, which is higher than many B2C offshore human agents. They also project that AI regulation will increase assisted service volume by 30% by 2028 as customers exercise the right to talk to a human. If that projection holds, the replacement thesis breaks. The reasoning is not abstract. Data center costs are rising. Vendor profitability pressure is real. Token-heavy complex use cases are expensive. And the signal lands hardest exactly where the work is most regulated. Healthcare access lines, Medicaid member services, PBM call centers, pharmacy help desks. None of these can resolve clinical or coverage questions inside a token budget. Compliance documentation, appeals handling, prior authorization. These are precisely the categories where AI cost per resolution rises fastest and human escalation becomes mandatory rather than optional. Technology adoption often begins with a replacement promise and matures into a redesign problem. The winning model may not be full automation. It may be hybrid service, better triage, higher value human escalation. AI does not replace labor when the machine becomes the expensive worker. And speaking of healthcare authority being tested, that story has its own ruling this week. A federal judge blocked North Dakota from enforcing its 2025 law requiring pharmaceutical companies to offer discounted medications through certain contract pharmacy arrangements tied to hospitals serving rural and low income populations. The ruling found the law preempted by federal 340B rules. More than 20 states have passed similar laws. The legal framing makes this look like a preemption dispute. What it actually is a contract pharmacy and PBM access fight that has been escalating since 2020 when Lilly, Sanofi, AstraZeneca, Merck, and Novartis started restricting 340B contract pharmacy access. HRSA pushed back. Courts split. State laws like North Dakota's are the legislative response to manufacturer restriction. The ruling does not just affect one state, it sits inside an active litigation map covering Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, and Kansas. If you work in this field, you already know how this works. Healthcare access disputes become preemption disputes. States build workarounds, industry challenges them. Federal courts decide whether state-level repair efforts survive, and safety net hospitals model 340B revenue into their operating margins, which means finance teams are forecasting revenue against litigation calendars, not program design. Watch the Eighth Circuit appeal, the Bristol-Myers Squibb versus Becerra trajectory, HRSA enforcement posture, and hospital association lobbying spend. In healthcare, the fight over access often hides inside the fight over authority. That same dynamic, resource constraints overriding local authority, is playing out in a completely different arena in Arizona. Arizona is enforcing stricter groundwater rules that limit new housing developments in water-scarce regions. The headline reads as environmental regulation. What it actually is a hard resource constraint reshaping real estate expansion. Development feasibility is shifting from financial modeling to resource access. And this is the second resource scarcity event redrawing Sunbelt capital allocation. California fire zone insurance pullouts from State Farm, Allstate, and Farmers were the first. Arizona water is the same pattern in a different resource. The investor signal is not only builder strategy, it is insurance availability, mortgage underwriting, FHA appraisal logic. When insurers and lenders price in water risk, valuations move before zoning catches up. Zoning used to control growth. Now resource scarcity does, and capital follows scarcity faster than policy does. Watch the major builders' exposure to Maricopa and Pinal counties. Watch insurance carrier disclosures and mortgage underwriting tightening. Watch the CAP board, and watch migration redirect into Nashville, Raleigh, San Antonio, and Charlotte as Phoenix-bound capital looks for stable water access. In the next housing cycle, water is equity. All of which brings us to the signal sitting over all the others today, because every one of these stories exists inside a financing environment the Fed is setting right now. The Federal Reserve is meeting today and tomorrow. The expectation is a hold with inflation pressure from energy prices, geopolitical instability, and uncertainty around future rate cuts all in play. But the rate decision is not the event. The press conference tone is the SEP if released, the long end Treasury response. Powell's language gap between the statement and the press conference has been the actual signal for 3 meetings running. The deeper pressure is sitting in commercial real estate. Roughly $1.5 trillion in CRE debt matures through 2026, with significant exposure concentrated on regional bank balance sheets. A rate hold is not neutral when refinancing assumptions written in 2021 meet a 2026 cost of capital. If you allocate capital, you have seen this dynamic before. Central banks become most structurally important when they appear least flexible. Holding steady can itself become a policy statement when the market wants relief and inflation data argues for restraint. The signal is not the headline rate. It is whether the financing environment keeps punishing weak underwriting assumptions written in a different cycle. When the Fed holds, it is still moving the room. So let's bring this together. 9 signals, one underlying shift. Payment rails are absorbing crypto. Settlement rails are mimicking it. Media rails are being pressured through licensing. Infrastructure rails are being tested through procurement. Energy rails are weakening under wartime coordination stress. Service rails are exposing AI's real cost curve. Healthcare access rails are being narrowed through preemption. Housing rails are being constrained by water. Capital rails are being disciplined by the Fed. The systems look different on the surface. Underneath, they are all being asked the same question. What looks like 9 separate stories is one coordinated test of institutional authority. Today's instruction: track the rails, not the rhetoric. That's the brief for today. Good to be in the room with you. Until next time, this has been CR Change Request.